Afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, Bryn Haldar, we'll just wait for everybody to come into the room, but please, if you just entered, please welcome yourselves in the chat, introduce yourselves in the chat. It'd be great to see who's here today.
Hello.
Okay, brilliant. We'll start off. And if anyone else joins us, and we'll just continue through. But we've only got half an hour today, so we'll get started. So, Bryn Haldar, croeso. Good afternoon. I'm Mike, Communications Manager at the Centre for Digital Public Services, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn session, How to Turn User Research Data into Valuable Insights. Following on from the popularity of our last series that ran through January to April, we are delighted to bring back another series from our brilliant user-centered design team that will run every fortnight over the next couple of months. This is the first session in that series, and we hope you will leave with a better understanding and tips for applying what you've learned today. We will be recording today's session and sharing this on our YouTube channel, so please turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen. Every Lunch and Learn is 30 minutes in length, so try and turn off any other distractions if you can and focus on the learning from today's session. It's going to be a great one. And so, without further ado, I will now pass you on to the brilliant duo that will be delivering today's session, Promise Michael and Tom Brain. So thank you. Diolch.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all well. Thanks for coming in and joining us this afternoon. So yeah, Promise and I are going to be giving just a quick kind of insight into some things I might be able to help with analysis of research data today. I guess the reason we are focusing particularly on that is because as researchers, we know it's not always easy, and sometimes you need a bit of a kind of leg up to different methods that can make it a bit easier for you. But we're also hearing from people who are undertaking kind of not necessarily user research all the time, but research in general as part of their role, that we're coming up against some challenges, particularly with data that's qualitative, so kind of observations and quotes and that kind of thing. So we've thrown something together that hopefully will help you today. This is the next slide. Thanks, Elise. This is the kind of lineup of what we'll cover. So we're going to focus on a technique called affinity mapping, and you'll kind of understand why as we go through it. But as a team, that's a method that really helps us quite a lot when it comes to analysis of qualitative kind of research findings and data. So I'm going to start with just a quick introduction into analysis. Apologies to those of you who are familiar already, but just in case some of you aren't. So next slide, please, Elise. Thanks. Analysis is basically the organization interpretation of raw data. The interpretation is important then to kind of convert that data into usable insights that you can then take forward to make kind of real change. And user research, obviously there are a few different methods that we use. These methods produce different types of raw data. So there's a little graphic that shows you a handful of, oh, sorry, next slide. Yeah, a little graphic here. It shows you a handful of the kind of different methodologies there are within user research, and they produce very different data types. So something like usability testing, which is about just kind of reviewing the usability of different services and products. You might get mostly quantitative or kind of numeric data out of that, which is fairly easy to kind of measure or to organize. Whereas, say, user interviews, which is a very different technique, what you'll get from that is mostly kind of qualitative data. So that will be kind of quotes and observations, and there needs to be quite a lot of interpretation done to that. Next slide, please, Elise. So like I said, if you're just dealing with quantitative data, that can be kind of fairly straightforward to analyze, and there are lots of different tools, lots of different software packages that kind of help automate that for you. So that can be quite quick and easy. Analyzing the qualitative stuff, can get trickier and can feel quite overwhelming, particularly, like I said, when you feel like you have to interpret a lot of that yourself. So there's a technique called affinity mapping that, like I said, we use a lot, and it's really useful. It's a really useful technique that helps kind of make sense of large amounts of that qualitative data. And I think Promise is going to talk a little bit more about affinity mapping.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So what is affinity mapping? Affinity mapping is also known as affinity diagramming, snowballing, and collaborative sorting. And for the purpose of this Lunch and Learn, I will be using affinity mapping and affinity diagramming interchangeably. So if you hear me say affinity mapping or affinity diagramming, just have in mind that I'm saying the same thing. So affinity mapping is the process of putting a bunch of sticky notes with research findings on them on the wall. That's if you're working physically in a workshop or in your office, or if you're using a real-time online whiteboard like Mural or Miro, and then grouping them based on their similarities. These groupings can help you extract insights and themes to just help you build effectively toward next steps. Next slide, please. So you can use affinity mapping to help analyze insights from stakeholders and user interviews. You can also use it to analyze insights from contextual inquiry. Contextual inquiry involves observing research participants in their natural context and just asking them questions to fill in the gaps of observation. You can also apply an affinity mapping to analyze insight from focus group, open-ended survey results, and as well as diary studies insights. Diary studies is more like a longitudinal user research method that would allow you and your team explore how users use your digital product or service over time. And aside diary studies, you can also apply affinity mapping in analyzing results from usability testing and even your team ideas. Next slide, please. So benefits of affinity mapping. So, since affinity mapping is usually done collaboratively, you can involve different stakeholders and get them to talk through different perspectives. Affinity mapping is a very time-efficient way to give stakeholders a taste of the research and just get them involved in forming insights. It can help them just put themselves in the user's shoes and develop a fuller understanding of the problem that they need to tackle. And one thing is for sure, if you put them face to face with the juiciest quotes from research participants, they won't forget it. And with affinity mapping, you can also cluster and rank large chunks of information. You can sum up the major insights, user needs, pain points, and gaps. You can also spot unexpected links, as well as just take a step back and not solutionize. Next slide, please. So this graphic here illustrates how you can use affinity mapping to get buy-in from stakeholders. I will just give you a second here to digest the graphic, and then I'll pass this over to Tom. So he'll talk about how you can collect and prioritize research data. Next slide, please.
Promise. So yeah, once you've collected your data, the kind of first step of analysis really is to prioritize what you have. So next slide, please. So you're often left, like I say, with qualitative data in the form of observations or quotes, but these can be recorded in a kind of range of ways. So you might have handwritten notes, you might have audio recordings or spreadsheet entries. Once you've finished the data collection process, you then need to kind of almost like standardize that data. So get it all into a similar format that's kind of readable and comparable. Next slide, please. Once you have that kind of comparable information, then you need to kind of go back through it and you learn, you start to prioritize the kind of more pertinent and interesting observations. When I say pertinent, I mean kind of pertinent to your original research question or kind of project objectives. You start to highlight that kind of pertinent, interesting stuff that's coming out of your research data and start transferring that perhaps into kind of post-it notes, like Promise was saying. Then you can include your project team if you want as well. It's, like Promise was saying, quite a collaborative method of analyzing information, and it helps kind of get people involved. It also helps your team to kind of develop empathy for the users and for their needs, which can be really important then in getting that buy-in and kind of driving the project forward. So I think Promise is going to talk to you about sorting and theming data.
Yeah. So you've collected and prioritized your research data. That's from what Tom just mentioned. Next thing would be to sort and theme this data. Next slide, please. And before then, who should sort data? As Tom mentioned, you're at this point encouraged to invite stakeholders for this activity. In particular, anyone who attended all or some of the research session, anyone that has an interest in the design that was tested or in any changes that would be made to the design. Next slide, please. So if you're working with stakeholders at this point, you should have communicated the agenda and the goals of the session, as well as described what people should be doing at each phase of the workshop. Then to start grouping, you walk up to the wall and grab a sticky note. So this is also applicable if you're working remotely. So you just grab a sticky note, you read it, and then you put it to one side where you sort your note. Then you grab another note if it's related to the first one that you just put to one side. You put it you put it next to it to form a cluster. But if it's not related, you put it further away to start a new cluster. And so that the session doesn't drag on, especially if you're working with your team, you be sure to give them a clear time frame so that they know how long they should spend on a particular step, and you do the sorting together as a team. And the aim here is to group similar sticky notes together. So similar in this context is for you to decide, because the goal of this activity is to draw connections. So there are absolutely no right or wrong answers. In essence, you just want to find connections that might be valuable for you. So you just keep in mind the research questions or the business goals that drove your research. And so by arranging or rearranging all the sticky notes, you're literally creating an affinity diagram. The common themes or patterns that you should look out for when you're sorting and theming or naming these categories should include or could include answers to specific research questions, frequently seen or heard topics, users' motivations, their problems, the unexpected, users' workflow, their goals, their needs, their roles, their priorities, even the positive experience that they have shared with you, their mental models, their demographics, and any specific terminology they've used during the course of the research. Next slide, please. Okay, so in case you wonder when the best time is for conducting an affinity mapping exercise, some teams prefer to sort the sticky notes after each research session or after all the sessions have been concluded. are some pros and cons in conducting this activity after each session, especially if time is on your side. So the benefit of this is that it helps the team gain a shared understanding after each user. It also reminds you and your team members of what they saw right when your memories are still really fresh, which can help with further discussion and with observing future sessions. It may ultimately be faster if your team members tend to take a lot of notes. And for rapid prototype testing with very early design iterations, it would enable you to summarize results quickly when you plan to design changes between user tests. The drawbacks here is that it takes a lot of time, and the same benefit might be achieved or maybe achieved with just a quick discussion with the people that observed the research sessions. And it can also deter stakeholders from coming to the final post-research affinity diagramming meeting. Next slide, please. So in this example, each user is assigned a color. The user's answers are then written out in detail on the color-coded sticky notes. This is not a very excellent example, but I thought to show you what it would look like after you've collected your research data in preparation for sorting and theming. Next slide, please. This is also a very good example that I took from Tom's affinity diagram from when he did usability testing on our website. If you notice here, he has sorted the research data and themed them. So theming, by theming, I mean naming the categories. Next slide, please. So this graphic here illustrates the timing guidelines for conducting an affinity mapping activity. This should just give you like a rough idea or estimate of how long you're supposed to spend on each step. So it's not cast in stone. You just decide depending on how much time and your team have for this activity. I'll pass this over to Tom so he can just take you through how to pull out insights. Tom.
Lovely, thank you. So next slide, please, Elise. So once you've worked through all those notes and you've pulled those into as many common themes as you can start to kind of convert those into insights and actions. And to give you a basic example of what I mean for that. So going back to that example Promise showed from the usability testing we did on the CDPS website, if, say, we observed a handful of people who were confused by one of the heading formats, thinking it was a link because of the color or it was underlined or whatever. One of the themes that might ultimately end up becoming is something like people click section headings because they think these are links. When you then come to draw the insight from that, it might look like we need to change the look of the section headings to avoid users becoming confused and confusing them for links. So it's kind of making that observation kind of actionable, really. And you probably want to prioritize the insights that start coming out as well, particularly if you start to get a lot of different insights coming through. Next slide, please. So a useful way to do that, and a kind of helpful little thing you can use, is the priority matrix. So it basically compares the effort needed to action some of the insights to the impact that will have on the user. Obviously, the ideal scenario is you get a load of insights that are high impact and low effort. These are your kind of quick wins. And generally speaking, those are probably the kind of the actions that you want to tackle first. Then you'll get some which are high impact but high effort. These will take a bit more time because they're going to take a lot more effort. So And those are the kind of big projects that might fall kind of out the back of them. And then generally speaking, if you're looking at anything that you identify as having low impact, those are the kinds of things you might just want to push to the side, because generally speaking, they're kind of thankless tasks. Now back to Promise. I think she's going to discuss how you share the insights.
Yeah, so as with every method and technique we use as research people, there would be absolutely no point in affinity diagrams if we did not put them to good use afterwards. But first, you need to know who you're sharing or presenting the findings to, what they care about, their level of familiarity with the product or service that you're working on, and the research itself. Next slide, please. And then you can now use the outcome of your affinity diagram to create user research report. It can be very detailed for your team and with less detail for maybe senior management. You can use the outcome of your affinity diagram to also inform the creation of empathy maps. You can use it to synthesize insights further and create a problem statement for your design process. You can also use it to provide a better foundation for ideation. You can use an affinity diagram to also build personas that represent your target audience in the best possible way, and create an executive summary again for senior management. And you can use it to create a slide deck presenting your findings in a visual and concise manner, especially if you have a lot of data or user quotes to share. And this can just be for probably the general public. So depending on the type of audience that you have to share your insights with, you can just target your findings to them. Next slide, please. So I did mention that you can use the outcome of your affinity map to inform the creation of an empathy map. And so I thought that I should just quickly show you what an empathy map is. This diagram illustrates an empathy map for buying a TV. An empathy map can be used to quickly explore the user's point of view. That is what they say, what they think, do, and feel as seen on this graphic. And yeah, I will pass this over to Tom so he can quickly take us through the recap.
Okay, yeah. So just to very quickly recap, because that was a bit of a lightning tour of analysis and empathy mapping. So we looked at analysis being the basic organization interpretation of research data, and then affinity mapping being a really useful technique to help make sense of a lot of data, particularly when it's qualitative data. And you can also involve your team with it to get their kind of buy-in. We looked at how to prioritize data, pulling out the most kind of pertinent and interesting observations, the sorting of the theming of data, so allowing themes to emerge when you start grouping similar observations. We looked at pulling out insights, converting your themes into insights and actions, where you might want to prioritize the insights too. And finally, Promise just looked at sharing the insights. So that's all about choosing the best method of sharing and presenting your insights to different audiences. That's particularly important if you do have kind of senior key holders who you really want to buy in. And like Promise is saying, sometimes you want to be smart about how you present some of your findings. Using those kind of quotes that really help them empathize can be kind of key there. So that's everything from us. Thank you so much for listening. Did anyone have any questions? I'm not sure we got much time, but there's an email address there. If you do have any questions that you'd like us to feed into, then by all means, feel free to email us, or if you want to pop them in the comments now, I'll do my best to try and get back to you. I wanted to mention and plug that we've recently put together a user research community, so kind of a community of practice, but we wanted it to be a bit broader than just practitioners. So if you're interested in user research, if you work in user research yourself, or if you kind of aspire to go into user research, then please feel free to sign up to that. I think Mike might be putting a link to that in the chat as well. And yeah, that's it from me. So thanks, and back to Mike.
Diolch yn fawr, Tom and Promise. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, just to let you know, if before you go, it'd be great if we can just get some instant feedback from you for today's session and kind of finding out what your main takeaway was from today. So if you can quickly grab your mobile device or on the device that you're currently on, and go to menti.com. You can type in the code 14155201, and that will take you through to our Menti. Very quick, just doing a sort of a scale on what you learned from today's session. Did you learn something new today? Have you got any further questions? And again, there was an open-ended question at the end about what was your main takeaway. So I will leave you there to fill in the Menti. That would be great. And before we go, I would like to also do a final plug to the rest of the sessions that we've got in this series. These are running every fortnight, same time, same place, on Zoom at 1 o'clock. So we have got a session, how to run a workshop to map your service, on the 24th of July. On the 7th of August, which is very timely because this is the first day of the Eisteddfod, we are doing a session on how to do pair writing and trio writing. And our final one in this series is going to be how to ask users the right questions. And I'm delighted to say that Liam Collins, who will be presenting with Vic Smith, how to run a workshop about your services here. And he's going to give you a little bit of an insight into that session. And I will post a link while he's talking about that session into the chat about how you can sign up to those events. So over to you, Liam.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Mike, and thanks, Promise and Tom, for an awesome session. And that was great. So yeah, the next session, like Mike says, on 24th of July, it's called How to Run a Workshop to Map Your Service, and it's going to be myself and my colleague Vic running that. We're going to cover like why we map services, what different types of maps might look like, and like how they help us to understand problems and sometimes ideate solutions too. And we're also going to run like a quick practical demo, kind of walkthrough of mapping a process, and hopefully that can be like a small practical method you can take away and use in your own roles where needed too. So yeah, it should be a super fun practical session.
Fantastic, thanks, Liam. So thanks again for everyone for coming along today. Big thank you to Promise and Tom. Like I said, if you want to get in touch with the team, there's the email address in the chat, but we will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording. And I know there's been a couple of requests in the chat around the presentation deck, so we'll look to get that across to you as well. But have a good rest of the day. Enjoy your lunch if you haven't had it yet, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, bye.